Adrian looked at her. Just remember, you're not alone. Sienna's eyes softened. I know. She turned and stepped inside, scanning the room. Victor was already seated in a private booth, his posture relaxed but his gaze sharp. He watched her approach. Sienna, he drawled, standing as she reached the table. You look conflicted. Victor's eyes glinted in the dim light in the restaurant, as he sat across from Sienna, his every move calculated. He watched her shift uncomfortably, knowing exactly what she was doing. She had been bait, but what he didn't realize was that he had already stepped into a trap more intricate than he could imagine. Adrian's plan had been flawless. Victor thought he was pulling the strings, but Adrian had always been the mastermind. Tonight, it wasn't just Sienna, who had a role to play, it was Adrian, lurking in the shadows, observing and waiting for the right moment. Sienna's voice was steady as she spoke, feigning uncertainty. I can't stop thinking about everything, she murmured. I feel like I'm being pulled in so many directions. Victor leaned forward. That's because deep down, you know where you truly belong. Her breath caught in her chest as she played along, but in her mind, she was counting the seconds. Adrian was nearby, just outside the door, and he was monitoring every move. Victor's words were meant to pierce, but they didn't. Not anymore. Sienna had moved past the hold he had on her. She glanced toward the door, where Adrian was waiting, calm and poised. It's not too late to fix this, Victor's voice interrupted her thoughts. You don't have to stay with him. We can have it all. You and me. Sienna didn't react immediately. She needed him to feel in control, to believe that he could still win. She looked so disgusting knowing what was coming next. Adrian's voice rang through her earpiece, calm and assuring, wait for it. Sienna bit her lip, playing the role of a woman torn. I don't know, she trailed off, as though her mind was clouded with doubt. Victor looked at Sienna, and said I never stopped wanting you. His words slithered into the air, but Sienna barely flinched. She had been playing him all along. Victor leaned back in his chair, his eyes not leaving her face. Adrian is just a distraction, Sienna. He's not the one who will give you everything you want. I am. That was it. The final bait. The last move in the game. Sienna didn't need to do anything more. The trap was set. She knew that Adrian would make his move soon enough. The moment Victor stepped out of the restaurant, Sienna followed closely behind. She knew the danger wasn't over. They had lured him into a false sense of victory, but that was exactly how they wanted it. It was time to teach Victor a lesson. As Sienna slipped into Adrian's car, the door clicked shut behind her, and she exhaled sharply, relieved to be out of Victor's presence. Well? Adrian asked, his voice tight with anticipation. Sienna turned to him. He believes me, she said quietly, her tone edged with the thrill of success. Adrian nodded, his jaw clenching with determination. That's good. But we can't stop here. We have to make sure he regrets believing it. Sienna's eyes softened as she looked at Adrian. Despite everything that had happened, despite the lies they had spun, the game they had played, she couldn't ignore the pull she felt toward him. There was something deeper there, something she didn't fully understand. But now wasn't the time to deal with it. He wants me back, she continued, her voice laced with a mix of disbelief and resolve. He thinks I'm his for the taking. Adrian's grip on the steering wheel tightened. Then he'll learn the hard way that he's wrong. The drive back to the estate was filled with a heavy silence. Adrian's mind was focused on the mission ahead, but Sienna couldn't shake the feeling that something was changing. Something between them. Adrian was no longer the stranger she met and agreed to help her out from Victor's schemes. He was something else. As they pulled up to the estate, Adrian cut the engine and turned to her. You did well tonight. Sienna nodded, but her heart felt heavier than it should have. She could feel the tension building, the push and pull between them. Adrian's words were always calculated, always confident. But she sensed something else in him, something vulnerable. And as they stepped out of the car, she realized that she wasn't the only one playing a game. Adrian was too, and she wasn't sure if she was ready to know all the rules. The following morning, Sienna walked downstairs, her mind clouded with thoughts of Victor's dangerous obsession and the way Adrian had looked at her when she spoke. There was something there. Something shifting beneath the surface. Adrian was already in his office, his phone pressed to his ear. He looked up as she entered, his expression unreadable. Victor's making moves, he said, his tone clipped. We need to stay ahead of him. Sienna nodded. What do you think he's planning? Adrian's voice laced with frustration. I don't know yet. But we need to be ready for anything. He won't stop coming for you. Sienna felt the weight of his words. The game wasn't just about her anymore. It was about survival. About staying one step ahead of Victor, whose every move seemed calculated, cold, and relentless. The house was quiet, Adrian's presence was steady, Sienna knew something was coming, she could feel it in the pit of her stomach. Victor hadn't given up. It was only a matter of time before he made his next move. Sienna sat on the couch, flipping through a book she couldn't focus on. Her thoughts kept drifting back to Adrian. To their strange, unspoken connection that had been building between them. It wasn't something either of them had addressed directly, but it lingered like a current between them. She glanced over at Adrian, who was pacing the room. You're thinking about Victor, she said softly, breaking the silence. Adrian stopped and looked at her, his eyes filled with concern. He's getting close. I can feel it. Sienna stood up and walked over to him, placing a hand on his arm. We'll figure it out. We always do. His gaze softened for a moment before he turned away, running a hand through his hair in frustration. This time feels different. He's making moves, and I don't know if we are ready for what comes next. Sienna had seen Adrian like this before, tough on the outside, but deeply affected by what was at stake. She didn't want to admit it, but she felt it too. The weight of everything that had happened, everything they were facing, was starting to wear them both down. The doorbell rang, breaking the tension. Adrian's posture immediately stiffened. It's him, he muttered, turning toward the door. Sienna followed closely behind as Adrian made his way to the front door. He peeked through the peephole and exhaled sharply. It's not Victor, he said, his voice steady but cautious. The door swung open to reveal a man in a dark suit. We need to talk, the man said, stepping inside without waiting for permission. Adrian led him into the living room, his hand on the back of Sienna's chair as he sat down. She could feel the tension radiating off him, but she kept her expression neutral. The man took a deep breath and locked eyes with Adrian. Victor's men have been spotted near the docks. He's moving fast. Trying to cut you off from your business partners. Sienna's stomach dropped. This wasn't just about her anymore. It wasn't just about surviving the game with Victor. This was about everything Adrian had built, and Victor was trying to destroy it piece by piece. Adrian's voice was calm, but edged with urgency. What else? He's also been moving money. A lot of it, the man replied, sliding a folder across the table. If he's really making a play, he's setting up for something big. It could be an attack. Adrian scanned the documents, his jaw tightening. Sienna could see the wheels turning in his mind. He was already planning their next move. But this time, it wasn't just about Victor. It was about protecting everything Adrian had worked for, and protecting Sienna. I'm going to need full access to his financials, Adrian said, his voice cold. We need to get ahead of this before it spirals out of control. Sienna stood up, her gaze fixed on Adrian. What do you want me to do? Adrian's eyes softened, but only for a second. Stay safe. Stay out of sight. Let me handle this. Sienna didn't argue. She knew the stakes had just been raised, and she could feel the danger closing in on all sides. But there was something else, something she couldn't shake. The more she was around Adrian, the more she realized how deeply she had begun to care for him. The next few days were a blur of planning, calculations, and quiet tension. Adrian's focus was razor-sharp, but Sienna couldn't ignore the quiet distance between them. He was doing everything he could to protect her, but there was something about the way he kept pulling away that unsettled her. It wasn't that he didn't care. She knew that. But Adrian had always kept his emotions hidden behind layers of walls. He had been hurt before, by people he trusted, and he wasn't about to let anyone in again. Not easily, anyway. Sienna had no idea how to breach those walls. Every time she thought she understood him, he became more elusive. But this wasn't just about Victor anymore. It was about Adrian too, and Sienna couldn't help but wonder if she was becoming more entangled in his world than she had ever intended. Adrian's plan to deal with Victor's latest move was risky, but it was the only option they had left. They would have to bait Victor, make him think he had the upper hand, and then strike when he least expected it. Sienna had no idea how far Adrian was willing to go to protect her, or how much of himself he was willing to sacrifice. The night was their window of opportunity. Adrian had arranged for a meeting with one of Victor's men, someone who could give them the inside information they needed. But Sienna knew that danger wasn't far behind. She stood in front of the mirror, adjusting her dress, as she tried to steady her nerves. Sienna thinks she is now part of Adrian's world. And she wasn't sure if that was a place she could ever truly belong. Adrian walked into the room just as she finished. His gaze softened as he took in her appearance. "You look beautiful," he said quietly. Sienna smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "We are not going on a date, Adrian. This is serious." He stepped closer, his hand brushing against hers. "I know. I won't let anything happen to you. I promise." But as she looked up into his eyes, she couldn't shake the feeling that he had already broken that promise. He had crossed a line that shouldn't have. The night stretched on with an uneasy quiet. Adrian and Sienna sat side by side in the dimly lit study, their attention focused on the screens in front of them. Adrian's fingers hovered over the keyboard, entering data that would expose Victor's next move. But as his eyes flicked over the figures on the screen, "Victor's getting too comfortable," Adrian muttered, breaking the silence. "He thinks we are cornered. That's why he's pushing now." Sienna sat across from him, her legs tucked beneath her, watching him carefully. And what happens when he realizes he's wrong? Adrian's eye was fixed on the screen, his fingers still tapping a rhythm against the desk. "Then we take everything from him before he has a chance to retaliate." Sienna nodded, but couldn't shake the nagging feeling that she had just witnessed something deeper in Adrian's words. He wasn't just talking about business. He was talking about them. About their survival. The door creaked open, and one of Adrian's men stepped inside. "We've got confirmation. Victor's making his move tonight." Adrian's back straightened instantly. "What's the plan?" "We have eyes on the docks," the man continued. "He's got a few men making the rounds, but it's the shipment he's waiting for. It's his final piece. Once he has it, he's going to take control of everything." Sienna's pulse quickened. "What's in the shipment?" The man hesitated before answering. "Weapons. High-grade stuff. He's going to escalate things, Adrian. It's not just about power anymore. He's looking to fight." Adrian's jaw clenched. "Then it's time we go on the offensive." The night air was sharp with tension as Adrian and Sienna moved through the shadows, carefully avoiding detection. They had set their trap, and now they had to wait for Victor to make his first move. Sienna's heart raced as they moved silently through the estate's underground passages. Adrian's hand was warm against her back, guiding her with practiced precision. She couldn't help but feel a strange mix of fear and excitement. This wasn't the life she had planned, but now, it felt like her only option. When they reached the control room, Adrian paused, his eyes scanning the monitors. The man who had been keeping watch handed him a set of documents. "Victor's meeting his buyer at the docks in an hour," he said. Adrian looked at Sienna. "We need to make sure we are one step ahead. If we are going to stop him, we need leverage." Sienna nodded, already understanding what he meant. They couldn't just fight Victor, they had to outsmart him. And the only way to do that was to strike where it would hurt the most. Adrian flipped through the documents quickly, his brow furrowing as he read through the details. "We'll cut off his supply line. We find his buyer, and we make them an offer they can't refuse." Sienna watched him closely, trying to read his thoughts. This was bigger than she had imagined. This was no longer about personal vendettas, it was about survival. And yet, in the midst of all this danger, she couldn't ignore the way her heart beat faster when he was near. The way he made everything feel like it was under control, even when it wasn't. "Are you ready for this?" Adrian asked, his voice softer than usual. Sienna hesitated, but only for a moment. "As ready as I'll ever be." Adrian studied her, and for the briefest second, something flickered in his eyes. It was a mixture of pride and something else, something that made Sienna's chest tighten. But it was gone as quickly as it had come, replaced by the cold determination she had come to know in him. The docks were eerily quiet, the only sound being the soft lap of water against the shore. Adrian and Sienna moved swiftly, as they approached the meeting point. Adrian glanced over at Sienna, his eyes sharp. "Stick close," he murmured. "We don't know how many men Victor's got here." Sienna nodded, her heart pounding in her chest. She had been in danger before, but this felt different. This felt like the endgame, the moment when everything would either come together or fall apart. They reached the edge of the dock, where a large shipping container sat, its contents unknown. A sleek black car pulled up, and two men stepped out, their movements calculated. One of them was Victor's right-hand man, the one who had been helping him move his operations without detection. Adrian and Sienna crouched behind a stack of crates, watching the scene unfold. The tension was palpable, the air thick with the promise of violence. "We make our move when they are distracted," Adrian whispered, his voice barely audible. Sienna's grip tightened on the gun in her hand. This wasn't just about Victor anymore. This was about everything they had built together, everything they had fought for. And she wasn't going to let him take it all away. As the men exchanged words, the situation became clear. This wasn't just a business transaction, it was a power struggle. Victor had been playing a dangerous game, and now he had put everything on the line. But he wasn't prepared for what was about to happen. Adrian moved first, stepping out from behind the crates with a cold, calculating stride. "I think it's time we end this," he said, his voice carrying across the dock. Victor's man immediately reached for his weapon, but Adrian was faster. In a flash, he had the man pinned, a gun at his temple. "You won't get away with this," Adrian growled. Sienna's heart raced as she stepped forward, her gaze fixed on Victor's man. "We have what you want," she said, her voice steady despite the chaos surrounding them. "But you're going to give us something in return." Victor's right-hand man hesitated, his eyes darting to Victor for guidance. But Victor was silent, his eyes calculating as he weighed his options. Adrian's grip on the man's arm tightened. "You can either walk away and live, or we can take everything you've worked for," Sienna added, her voice laced with cold resolve. The man's gaze flickered between Adrian and Sienna, and for a moment, it seemed as though he might give in. But just as quickly, he pulled away, ready to make his move. That's when everything changed. The quiet hum of the night seemed almost mocking in its calmness, as the standoff continued. Adrian's eyes never left Victor's man, his grip on the gun unyielding. The tension between the two parties thickened like fog, and every second felt like it stretched into eternity. Victor stood at the far end of the dock, his hands tucked into his coat pockets, watching the unfolding drama with a detached, calculating air. He hadn't moved, he never did when he was in control. He wanted to see how Adrian would handle the situation, how much of a challenge this would be before Victor decided to take his next move. But Adrian was no fool. He could feel the clock ticking, every heartbeat a reminder of how fragile this situation was. The dock felt deserted, but Adrian knew better. The men Victor had stationed around the perimeter were waiting for the signal. And the moment that signal came, all hell would break loose. "Sienna," Adrian whispered, his eyes briefly meeting hers. "Stay behind cover." Sienna didn't argue. She knew the plan, and she trusted him completely. There was no room for error now. Victor's man shifted uneasily, his face twisting in frustration as Adrian maintained his grip on the situation. Adrian could practically hear the wheels turning in the man's head. Was he ready to make a move? Was he going to try and call in reinforcements? Before anything could unfold, a distant noise pierced the silence, a sharp crack of a distant gunshot. Everything went still. Adrian's head snapped toward the source of the sound, a flash of recognition and dread crossing his face. "They've found us." The man Adrian was holding seemed to panic for the first time, eyes darting wildly. "You need to leave. Now?" Victor's plan had been set in motion. Adrian's men were already engaged in battle, and Victor was using this distraction to make his play. Adrian wasted no time. He shoved the man aside, knocking him to the ground with the force of the movement. "Get her to safety," Adrian ordered one of his men, who had appeared from behind cover. Sienna didn't hesitate, moving quickly to follow Adrian's instructions, but her heart hammered in her chest as she glanced back. She could feel the battle intensifying, the weight of what they had been trying to avoid now upon them. The night had descended into chaos. Gunshots rang out in the distance, and the sounds of shouting and footsteps echoed through the alleyways. Adrian was already on the move, taking charge, as he led Sienna away from the docks. His men were handling the confrontation, but Adrian had always been about controlling the situation. He couldn't leave anything to chance. "Adrian, what's going on?" Sienna asked, her voice sharp with urgency as she matched his pace. "Victor's trying to force a confrontation," he said, his voice low but resolute. "He thinks he can overwhelm us. We can't let that happen." This was no longer just a standoff between them and Victor, it had escalated into a full-blown battle for control. And in moments like this, it wasn't just the threat of violence that scared him, it was the reality of what he was willing to do to survive. Sienna could see the change in him. The way his eyes focused with precision, the way his every move seemed deliberate. He wasn't just protecting her now, he was protecting everything he had built. And in that moment, Sienna knew she had to trust him. She had no other choice. Adrian led her to the garage, where a sleek black car sat waiting. He threw open the door, and she slid inside without a word. Adrian slammed the door shut behind her, and in an instant, they were speeding away from the chaos. But the battle wasn't over. The game was far from finished. "We'll make our move once we are clear," Adrian said, his voice steady despite the tension in the air. "But we need to act fast." Sienna looked out the window, her pulse still racing as the city blurred past. "Where are we going?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "We are going to hit Victor where it hurts," Adrian said. "His resources. His connections. We take his empire apart, piece by piece, and we make sure he knows it's over." Sienna didn't respond, but in her gut, she knew this wasn't just about survival anymore. This was personal. And whatever Adrian had planned, it would force the world to reckon with the truth: Victor wasn't the only one capable of winning this fight. Adrian's strategy was simple but brutal: cripple Victor's assets, take away his leverage, and strike a deal that would leave him with nothing. It was a methodical plan, but Adrian knew that Victor would never back down without a fight. The day after the failed meeting at the docks, Adrian and Sienna found themselves standing in a cold, sterile boardroom, facing a different kind of battle. The walls were lined with sleek wood and polished metal, the windows offering a clear view of the city below. Sienna glanced over at Adrian, noting the tension in his posture. He was calm, but she could see the cracks forming beneath the surface. She knew this plan would be costly, but the question was, how much would they be willing to lose in the process? As Adrian spoke with a few of his trusted associates, Sienna found herself lost in thought, wondering how much longer they could keep running this dangerous game with Victor. It wasn't just about her anymore, it was about them, about everything Adrian had built. Sienna knew she was falling for him. And that made the situation all the more complicated. But she also knew that if they didn't act now, Victor would come for them all. The final confrontation happened faster than either of them had expected. With Victor's empire crumbling, he was forced into a corner. The power he once held so confidently was slipping from his grasp, and now he had nothing left to lose. Sienna and Adrian stood together in the heart of the chaos, watching as Victor's world disintegrated around him. The man who had once seemed unstoppable was now on the defensive, scrambling to hold onto what little power he had left. But it wasn't Adrian who delivered the final blow, it was Sienna. Not with force, but with words. She stood face to face with Victor in his final moments of desperation, her voice calm and unwavering. "You never understood, did you?" she said. "This wasn't about winning. It was about control. And you lost it the moment you underestimated us." Victor's eyes flashed with something close to disbelief, but Sienna didn't flinch. She had learned that the best way to defeat someone like Victor was not with violence, but with the power to outsmart them. And in that moment, she realized that this had been her fight too. Adrian stood beside her, his arm resting protectively around her shoulders. "It's over, Victor," he said quietly, but there was finality in his voice. Victor didn't respond. He simply turned and walked away. And as the dust settled, Sienna felt a strange sense of peace. It was over. But what came next was uncertain. Adrian turned to her, his face softening for the first time in weeks. "We are free," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. Sienna nodded, her heart full. But as much as she wanted to reach for him, to let him in, she understood. There was still too much left unsaid. "Let's take it slow," Adrian murmured, his eyes searching hers. "Let's see where the future takes us." And for the first time, Sienna didn't argue. Whatever came next, she knew they would face it together. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like this video, drop your comments, and hit the subscribe button, hit the notification bell to know when we drop a new video.